Coming up, the New York Football Giants fall to 0-8 at home. Is this the blowout loss that Andy feared could break the franchise? We dive into it all coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy, wealthy, and wise, and talking about the 35-14 home loss at the hands of the Baltimore Ravens, and reminding that today's episode is brought to you by Pietential, Pietential. That spells Pietential.com. You get over there where you're going to go ahead and have tools to improve your well-being and also methods to track your progress over time. It's a great opportunity to make sure that the version of yourself is your best self. Check out Pietential today. Andy, how are we starting a Monday morning after a meaningless football game by all accounts?
Yeah, you know what? It's nice. This was officially the first time, sneakily, I think you and I, like when the games kick off, you still want the Giants to win because you're so like ingrained and embedded in like wanting your team to have victory. This was the first time for sure that I was completely checked out. I don't know if you felt the same way, but I'm like, let them score as many points as humanly possible because I cannot have the Giants even messing around having a chance to win this game.
No, of course. Yeah. In recent weeks, you and I have, come to the terms of what it means and what needs to happen here, regardless of head coach or GM or anything of that. Just have the best, highest draft pick possible to give yourself the best chance. And it does. It changes the way. When the ball kicks off, you go, well, I assume Lamar Jackson's going to have a field day, which he did, and we'll talk about. So let's just make sure we secure that loss. Before we talk a little more specifics on the game, of course, at the high level, we talk about Tankathon. The Giants are, for the moment, with the Vegas Raiders playing on Monday night, holding the number one overall pick 2-12. And guess what? In terms of losses mattering, yeah, they matter because New England lost, because Jacksonville lost, Carolina lost, Tennessee lost, Cleveland lost, and then the Jets, who played against one of these other top teams, they got the only win there inside of those top 8. Chicago lost as well. They're a 4-win team here. So, I mean, everybody, by the way, all the way to the 12th position in the draft order, only the New York Jets put up a win on Sunday. So it was important for the Giants, but, to lose that game and give themselves a chance. And then, of course, Giants fans will be watching tonight as the Raiders hit the field and see whether or not New York officially holds on to the number one pick through this week's action.
Yeah, Adam, it is interesting to see how the board played out. We talked about wanting the Jets to maybe get one more win just because in that critical game against the Jaguars have a much easier schedule where they could mess around and accidentally win a game or two. They also seem to have their quarterback of the future in Trevor Lawrence. So like them being around is not as troublesome for the Giants as, say, a team like the Jets, who presumably want to move on from Aaron Rodgers and desperately need a quarterback of the future because they don't have that guy on the roster today. So overall, a little bit difficult, but I think that game broke the way that Giant fans would hope it broke. Unfortunately, there's other teams like New England and others that just aren't good enough, aren't competitive enough, kind of like the Giants right now, to even have these games under consideration of getting a win.
Yeah, at least in the moment, you say New England, Jacksonville, even Carolina, nice turnaround for Bryce Young overall after a very difficult start to his season. Teams that feel like they probably have the QB or go into next year thinking and knowing they have the QB versus Tennessee. We've already heard rumors. Maybe that's where Daniel Jones lands to push Will Levis. He did not have a good day over the weekend either. So, and then Cleveland as well, right? So handful of teams that you think have their QB position set. Obviously, the biggest battle is going to be the Raiders, and we'll keep an eye on that. When we turn inside this game, I'll ask you if you have any big takeaways here, anything that matters on a low or high level. I'll just point out the fact that there's two things. Let's compare the QBs here, right? Lamar Jackson, 21-25, 290 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, a QBR of 93.3, a 154.6 rating overall. Now, on the other side, Josh Johnson did come in, didn't attempt any passes, though, in relief after this one was well out of range. Started with Tommy DeVito. He gets beat up pretty rough. Unfortunately, on a high level, he seems like a quarterback that's going to have a hard time staying healthy. He's not the biggest guy in the world, and we've seen that now over his first couple of seasons. Tim Boyle in relief, 12-24, buck 23, touchdown, interception. Anything matter to you in this game? Low, high, middle, any level at all?
Yeah, so on the defensive side of the ball, we knew Lamar Jackson is a two-time MVP, a unanimous MVP. We knew he was
That's
going
right.
to be awesome against a secondary that is decimated with injuries, but even when healthy, is not very good to begin with, right? So, like,
Also true.
I already assumed that that was going to be the case. The thing that I keep going back to, specifically around the game, is obviously Tommy DeVito was 10 of 13, but he was, 5 yards reception. He had a 41 quarterback rating in his limited snaps. He threw for 68 yards. Obviously, he was getting hit quite a bit. He holds the ball for a very, very long time, and his
Yeah.
head seemed to hit the turf pretty aggressively. Was in the concussion protocol. They went with Tim Boyle. The thing that gets to me, and I think it was
Mm.
noticed by a lot of people, especially Malik Neighbors saying it too. They're like, "Oh, Tim Boyle looks like he throws the ball like a first team starter." Tim Boyle was decisive in getting the ball out in situations and circumstances
Uh,
that he needed to.
yeah.
Like Tim Boyle
Yes.
actually looked like a half competent quarterback. And to
Sure.
me, is that a detriment? Is that a knock on Joe Shane and Brian Daboll? Like, why is it that Tim Boyle, who is a journeyman bounced around quite a bit, looks more confident with the football than both the $5 million man Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito, who's been kept around before? Is it a knock to you, or is it a tip of the cap to the coaching staff and GM that Tim Boyle looks the same as all the other quarterbacks they had?
Yeah, 6 seasons, 7 teams in 6 seasons for Tim Boyle. He's obviously bounced around. He's played in a handful of games, Green Bay, Detroit, right? Bubbled up there, obviously, with the Jets a couple of seasons ago as well for a few games. Never thrown more than 94 pass attempts in any given season. This is what okay, I'll do the tinfoil hat, which is I think, well, it was always about tanking and this season didn't matter. So the Giants set themselves up for failure at that position, right? We're going to stick with Daniel Jones. We can't get rid of him just yet. And by the way, now we're up to 4 QBs that have played under center for the New York Football Giants this season. Maybe we'll have a little end of year comparison between those stats. The other side of it would be to say, and I maybe this does track a little bit, is New York and Brian Daboll little too bullish on his ability to make, I can make anybody good. I'll make Tommy DeVito serviceable. Drew Lock can be that guy. Whether or not they sold themselves on a player like Drew who wasn't as good as they thought he could be, that could be debated. And then the other side of it is if you can make something out of nothing, maybe like Tim Boyle, who's been around enough and seen enough systems that it's easy probably to step in and play adequately, then it's why did you bother with the Drew Lock signing in the offseason? Why not just take a guy on a flyer and go ahead and stick him in there with Tommy DeVito and Daniel Jones and let it play itself out? This always goes back, I think, to allocation of funds and whether or not Joe Shane and Brian Daboll in tandem make the best decisions in the off seasons.
Yeah, Adam, that's what I keep struggling with. It's like angel of the devil here on my shoulders. It's like you've had Drew Lock in the building in camp since
Yeah,
they signed him early on in the offseason. You've had 2 years of Tommy DeVito inside of this system learning the offense. You pull Tim Boyle a few weeks ago onto the practice squad, and I couldn't tell the difference between any of them, right? And to
right.
me, that's the biggest indictment is how do you pay $5 million for Drew Lock and you're getting the same production as if you pull a random journeyman
Sure.
off of the street to be able to run this offense. So to me, there's just something missing. Like obviously we haven't talked about Daniel Jones in a while. The team wasn't great underneath him. If
Yeah.
like as you kind of see people getting more hurt, different quarterbacks coming in, the problems are still the same with the Giants. And so for me, I look at Tim Boyle and I say, all right, like we could pull another guy off the street. Who if Tommy DeVito can't play and Drew Lock is in a walking boot, they're going to have to pull another guy off of the street to be the
Right.
backup quarterback for Tim Boyle. And it's like if they all look replacement level or worse, at some point you got to look and say, why is this happening to the Giants? Why couldn't we, knowing Daniel Jones's injury risks, have a better setup in the quarterback room in case he inevitably got injured or wasn't playing well like he did the previous season? To me, it just feels like this is another indictment on the entire organization of like, how is it that it looks this way when we had all this time to prepare for the inevitability of Daniel Jones either being hurt or not being here?
Yeah, let's talk about here in a second the difference between wanting competency versus thinking the season could have been any different than what we're currently seeing a 2-win team. We'll do that here as we continue OGP. All right, so you bring up a good point there about what are we trying to assess here? And you and I both agree. We're not sitting here assessing, well, you should have had QBX so that you could have stayed competitive around this. That's not the nature of the way this team was constructed. But when it comes to evaluating or giving good reps to your rookie wide receiver, to your rookie running back, right, to an offensive line that's in a bit of state of flux and, has had some new pieces coming in, I think that that's what, at least that's what I point to as, I want to make sure that even if we're having a bad year, yesterday's a great example. Listen, the team's going to stink. The team's going to be bad. The team's going to lose this game. But do you ensure that you give yourself a good opportunity to put some of your players in positions to get some solid reps? And by the way, once you get Tim Boyle into this game, to your point about what he put on tape, which, like, just as a sidebar here, if you want to compare Tim Boyle to Drew Lock, there's a reason why 33 games compared to 23 and their overall 0-5 record for Tim Boyle as a starting quarterback. Also a guy that has 5 touchdown passes, 13 picks in his career. Like, there's very big differences between them on paper as to why you would want Drew Lock, why you would bring him in, why he has the pedigree. But go back to this game. This was the first time, it's been 8 weeks since Malik Neighbors got a touchdown. He had 10 catches for 82 yards in this one, caught the touchdown, 14 targets, only a long of 23. So a lot of work had to get done here because obviously Baltimore is not going to allow any explosive plays from that standpoint. But that matters. Tim Boyle being under center in the game yesterday allowed Malik Neighbors to put up some stats. And even though it doesn't matter from a win or loss standpoint, it matters to have Malik Neighbors be kind of having a good time out there. Even if the team's losing, I'm not going to care that Malik Neighbors doesn't care that the team's losing or winning games or however he reacts or responds to questions. I need him to be having fun and feeling like he's building a strong rookie season. You now take a step back and you see that Malik Neighbors through this year, after having a long drought in touchdowns, when we got a little over our skis early in the season, he's got 90 catches. He's got 90 catches on 140 targets for 900 yards, 4 touchdowns. With a few more games to go here, he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. He may be able to get to 6 touchdowns potentially. These things matter, and the QB is directly tied to the ability to offer that success.
Yeah, Adam, you're spot on. That was going to be the positive in this is Malik Neighbors was like, it is important for me to get to 1,000 yards. And when he talks about individual statistics, I'm totally okay with it because the Giants have already waved the white flag as an organization. It's like, how do you want this guy to be like, well, we're trying to compete and win each and every game when the organization has already said, no, that's actually not what we're trying to do. So for me, making sure he stays engaged, making sure he gets his reps and he feels like he's part of the team and that they can build on something is important. You mentioned it. 100 catches, presumably, 1,000 yards, and maybe he sprinkles in another touchdown or 2 over the last couple of games of the season. And now all of a sudden you're talking about with 4 or 5 different quarterbacks, 1,000-yard receiver with half a dozen touchdowns, 100 catches, and you're like, imagine what he can do with actual, real, competent quarterback play.
And oh, by the way, like we talked, remember at the beginning of the year, we're talking about what could the Giants do? What could Malik Neighbors do specifically in this offense? I said it seems impossible. And I'm going to end up on the low side. And Malik missed, some reps here over the course of the season with injury. I said he could be a 90-plus receiver because of the target share. He's at 140 already. He's going to end up with 155, 160 targets on the season. That the pure volume alone is what got you excited about it. How far he goes in terms of yardage, you can see in a game like this, 14 targets, 10 catches, but still held relatively in check overall by a defense that can sit back and play a bit of shell work. I want to continue on anything else you have out of this game. I will just flip it back the other way real quick here. In terms of things that bothered me about this, you can take it for whatever it's worth. It's a hard game, not a lot of guys, teams decimated, injuries, all that stuff. When you look at it and you see 290 yards from Lamar Jackson and 5 touchdowns, nice and easy, take your time. But the thing that I actually think bothers me the most about it is that Rashad Bateman averaged 26.7 yards per catch, that Aguilar averaged 26 on his only reception, but that you also gave up a 21-yard reception to Walker for the touchdown. His first reception as a NFL player was a touchdown. Andrews, 2 for 20 or average 12. There's something about like when you see the big numbers in the average per catch, it's just, even if you're going to be bad, which we know they are, there should just never be a world. It should have been everything you catch is 15 yards and we're going to tackle you and make the field long. And again, it doesn't matter. I wanted the loss ultimately for the New York Giants, but it's something that jumps out to me when you look back at the stats and you go, yeah, you did some things well. You stymied a player like Henry, right? So you did some things well, but it keeps jumping out of me with Shane Bowen as someone who I think many may be willing to give a little bit more of a pass than you and I have been willing to over these last handful of games.
Yeah, Adam, I don't put as much stock into that because honestly, it's like, who is even playing in the secondary for the Giants in this game? You're like, Adam, it was Dane Belton led the team in tackles. You had Jason Pinnock in as well. There was no Tyler Nubin, no Drew Phillips. You had Greg Stroman third in tackles on the entire team. You had guys like Elijah Garcia getting in. Art Green played a bunch of snaps. Anthony Johnson was in. When you start going down the list, you're like, some of these players weren't even on practice squads 2 weeks ago. And so for me, I'm kind of like, yes, an MVP in Lamar Jackson will dice them up. It didn't seem like they quit. I just don't think that they have the talent on the field in order to be able to make the plays that we were hoping they would make.
So, and I want to talk about the quit portion of this, which we're going to do to close out today's episode. But before we get to that, the 0-8 at home, you talked about it coming in. Historic bad loss in a historically bad season in the 100th year of the franchise. How did you view this game? All things in total, the players that weren't on the field, everything else. Did you view a 35-14 loss as being something that, in your mind, Brian Daboll shouldn't be able to recover from, that the team just has to at some point say, there's too many negative stat lines here on this season for us to continue forward?
Well, before we get into the final piece of it, where I do want to talk about another plane flying overhead, because I think it's important to hear some of the details around that. Adam, I think that this was about as mediocre as the Giants could be, where it doesn't change the opinion in my mind about anything. Like, they lost by 20 points. That's kind of what I expected. What we had talked about on Friday's show is, don't be historically bad. Like, I know we're 0-8 at home, but in one game, you can't lose by 45 points. You can't lose by 55 points. They at least, had some window dressing with Malik Neighbors. They did enough where, like, the team didn't quit. They just weren't talented enough. To me, it wasn't like they just laid down and said, let's lose by 100 points. It was, we're just not good enough, but we're going to try our best. And to me, I'm like, okay, that doesn't change my opinion on anything. At least we're kind of where I thought we were. If it got historically bad, we're getting just embarrassed all over the place, to me, that would have kind of been the nail in the coffin. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, it was 14-0. It was 21-7. Like, you say you're within 2 scores, so technically it's not. Again, no one ever had any sense that the Giants were going to be threatening to come back in this game. I think you're right. Again, everything does factor in. That's when we talked about it on Friday. I had that little sense of, I don't know. I don't know if even a blowout loss of, 48-14 would that dramatically change my perspective with everything that goes into it. But it does lead us ultimately to the conversation around where is this organization in regards to on the field level, Brian Daboll, and then we take it upstairs and we think about someone like Joe Schoen. So closing things out here, coming up in a second, what do we think it means that the team didn't quit and hasn't quit, regardless of who's coming in the door to play on Sunday for the Giants, on head coach Brian Daboll? We'll do that to close things out here in just one moment. Does Brian Daboll still have the locker room? That's the question, Andy. And by all accounts, he does. Now, the saving grace of a bad season is that when there's injuries and everything else, you just kind of bring guys in. And those guys know I'm showcasing for the offseason and for other teams that may want to look at me, maybe for this team going into next year. So that's the nice part of always getting maximum effort, no matter what, no matter who goes on the field. You can't get guys to take plays off unless they're having a real attitude problem. Go see the San Francisco 49ers for that example back on Thursday night. Does this signal, is this a positive to you for Brian Daboll? If he's walking in to John Mara's office after the season ends and he goes, listen, we know the record, but go talk to the players. They all have my back. They all believe in what we're trying to do.
Great. So the guys that basically want to keep a job all have his back, as opposed to the people that are paying to go see the games and actually are the ones materially, on the P&L lines of Mr. Mara.
What would the banner read flying over the stadium if they posed a public question? How does the fan base feel about Brian Daboll?
Yeah, and so listen, it is an important indicator if the players are still playing hard and believe in the coach. And even Darius Slayton kind of said, oh, this isn't as bad as like some of the other seasons I've been here. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's supposed to be a positive. Like, this is a tire fire right now. And he's saying, well, it's been way worse since I've been here. You're like, Darius.
Tire fire, sure, but there's no gasoline. So that's good.
Yeah. Like, I know I have matches in my hand, but like, not a big deal. But Adam, listen, the reason why I go in a different direction is because we had another airplane banner game come out, and you may laugh at this, but I'm going to go on a little soliloquy, and then I want you to give me your honest opinion. I already know kind of where you stand on all this, but I'm going to see if I can try to change your feelings a little bit. Okay. So we had a banner fly overhead for the Saints game, and basically it said, Mr. Mara, enough. Please fix this dumpster fire. And so that was the Saints game. And you're like, okay, people are starting to put money towards making sure the message is heard by ownership. The Giants obviously lose that game in silly fashion where they missed the field goal at the end. Didn't matter anyway. But we go into this game against the Baltimore Ravens. We're 17-point underdogs, and yet another plane has a banner flying over Adam, right? And to be honest with you, NJ.com, Ryan Novozinski got the scoop on this. He actually spoke to the person that had the banner for the airplane flying overhead. This one today actually read, and I quote, "Mr. Mara, enough. We won't stop until you fire everyone." That's what the banner said. And so, Adam, when they talked to the guy who ended up paying for this, he was like, to be honest with you, I tried to do it last week, and I heard there was another group that was already.
You got to coordinate. Yeah, you got to coordinate on these things. You know what I mean?
And he's
really
like, I can't put a hat on a hat. We can't have two banners flying around. They'll take this week. I'll take the next home game, and we'll make sure that the message is reinforced. And to me, I was like, holy smokes. There is multiple groups of Giants fans that are so fed up with what is going on that they're getting in line to spend almost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to make sure ownership knows how upset and how frustrated the fan base was. Like,
sure.
I'll stop there for a second and say to you before I continue on, is that surprising to you that there's multiple groups, multiple people inside the fan base that are like, I'm willing to spend money to fly planes overhead so Mr. Mara knows how bad this is?
No, I know how silly this sounds, but fan is the root word of fanatic, and that's what you expect. Like, they're passionate, and you want to see that. They're not totally checked out. They're so frustrated by it that they're going to spend their own money. They're going to coordinate this thing to send a message to ownership about what they want. The question that I would pose, I'll pose it back to you because you're a generational season ticket holder. Absolutely nothing changes for the New York Football Giants. They keep Brian Daboll. They keep Joe Shane. They go into the offseason. They have the draft, free agency, everything else. Week 1's a home game next year. You're going at the start of next season. You are fully back in, regardless of whether or not you disagree with Daboll being here, Shane being here. If they draft or don't draft a quarterback, you're going to go. And I think that the majority of fans are going to do that same thing. As the season is winding down here with only one more home game, fans are checking out. Guess what? Every fan base checks out when the team is so bad and it's not worth it. You try to sell them to visiting fan bases and get, money or value out of your season tickets. And I'm not saying this doesn't resonate. The product on the field matters for an organization. Why? Because it's money. It is money. It's people coming in. It's people buying products and everything else. I get that. But the bottom line is everyone's going to reset next year. Everybody will, because that's what it is to be a fan. Every year, hope springs eternal. I'll ask you, do you think that the fan base, nothing changes, they lose the rest of the season, they're a 2-win team? Do you think that the fan base is going to say that 30% of the fan base is going to say, I'm done. I'm selling my season tickets. I'm selling my PSL. No. Why? Because the second they did that, there'd be 30% of the new fan base that would come in and buy all that up. So it's not, I'm not knocking it. I respect everyone that's doing it, but it really doesn't change what next season is going to start like in mind.
So it is a fair point to say the next season, everyone will go in with, optimism. We turned over a new leaf, but did we really, if we kept everyone here together? I think, Adam, it's a good question. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is,
and by the way, just real quick, the margin would be far more razor thin in terms of lose your first home game next year, go on the road and lose one, come back home, lose again, be 0-3. That would the disgust, the banners flying over the stadium would start certainly far sooner next season, 100%.
Yeah, so that's where I'm going to go with this. But what I will say now is it is impacting the Mara family and ownership right now in terms of their wallet. This game was 50% full at kickoff. There was 50% of the seats were available. You could get in for $20. The majority of the people that were at that game were Ravens fans that had bought the tickets, that drove up 95 to make sure that they had that. And the Giants still have multiple home games. Still, or they have one more home game, and when you look at it, you say, what's going to be the whole situation of the Giant fans in that one? It goes to concessions, it goes to jersey sales, it goes to everything. This is materially going to hit their wallet, and people are upset about it. Now, I thought the guy who put the banner out, the second guy who put the banner out, said, "How pissed are you about all this?" And he said, "Pissed is the wrong word. I'm apathetic. The product is so poor to where today we were losing so poorly that the only bright spot for the offense was the Ravens' defensive penalties and the last resort quarterback, Tim Boyle. What he's saying, and this is the big thing, is when people get apathetic about something, they stop to care. When they are passionate enough to fly banners, it means that they care enough to try to get this thing out of the tire fire that it's in. You nailed it perfectly. They could come back next year and you may lose a small faction that was like, that's it, because they're staying, I'm out. The problem is you will still have the scar tissue of this season, this GM, this coaching staff, and the leash is so short to the point where if they go with a bridge quarterback and they go 3 and out on the first drive, there will be people wearing paper bags on their head. There will be boos right out of the gate. And if you get the fan base apathetic at them by the 4th home game of the season, we're in mid-October, like early November, and the season is already lost, you're talking about like losing potential fans forever at that point. And I'm wondering if that's going to be playing in the back of their minds.
I listen, it is all a factor, and you know, you can take this however you want. Fans, you're passionate and you love the Giants and you want them to do well. I'm a Giants fan too, but John Mara loves the Giants. Like John Mara wants the Giants to do well. You can take it however you want it in terms of ownership and how they should approach decision making, but he is also passionate. It's the reason why, whether I agree or disagree with it, it's the reason why fans do believe that when they fly these banners, it does resonate with ownership, because John Mayer is there in the stadium going, Jesus effing, I'm watching my own fan base throw these kind of messages in my face while other fan bases are in the stadium enjoying these games. So I think it's a factor. And for me, it's going to be interesting because I think this is a weird kind of double-edged sword in some ways as well. If you remove everybody from it and you sell the rebirth of the organization going into next season with a new GM and new coach, while it won't be as bad, if the new regime starts 0-3 and they lose their first couple home games, the problem here is the erosion of trust in the organization and their decision-making. So you'll immediately start to also get the buzz of, did we choose wrong again? We just did 3 years of this GM and this head coach. Are we now starting a new 3-year journey? And we know all the turnover, 2-year stints for so many head coaches leading up to this moment. So whether or not there'll be an overcommitment to Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll because they don't want to keep doing that, that's interesting. The other thing about this that I think we'll discuss, and as we're going to be doing midweek for the rest of the year, talking about other GM and head coach tandems, I do still wonder a little bit about what is the push and pull of keeping the head coach, losing the GM. And it's like, well, that's not great. Right. But then it affords you another opportunity next season to go, we kept Brian Daboll, we brought in a new GM. We kept Brendan Brown, right? And now 3 weeks in, doesn't look like it's working. Well, now Brendan Brown can fire Brian Daboll. Now we can turn it over and you can sell it again. And guess what? It's cynical of me, but I said at the start of this year about what this season was, and I'll say it again. You're always trying to hedge the ability to sell the product and then also be able to sell the pivot if that product isn't working. So it's really interesting and fascinating to see how this unfolds.
Adam, at the end of the day, think of this key thing. When you talk about the first 3 quarterbacks that were taken off the board this past season, you have Caleb Williams, you have Jaden Daniels, and you have Drake May, right?
Yes.
The Chicago Bears decided to keep Matt Eberflus in that whole tire fire and say, let's keep some consistency with our head coach and bring the new quarterback in. And what happened? They brought in a new offensive coordinator. They fired him. They saw the head coach wasn't good. They fired him. They promoted some people inside. It has been an absolute mess that they look and you know that if they could turn back the clock and say, we should have just cleaned house before Caleb got here, they would have done it. And then you look at the Washington Commanders in the playoff hunt right now. If the playoffs started today, they would be a playoff team. What did they do? They cleared house. They hired Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, started anew with Jaden Daniels. They look great. You look at the New England Patriots. They decided to make Jared Mayo the coach. He was kind of like the interim coach, like all these different things. They know that Jared Mayo is not the guy. They decided to keep him for consistency purposes. You know, at the end of this season, they are going to fire Jared Mayo, and they are going to look back and say, we should have started with a new head coach, an offensive-minded coach to help Drake May along. So the 2 teams that decided to keep their consistency with their coaches and their new quarterback, one of them's already fired. Another one's got a couple more weeks before he's going to be fired. You look at the team that turned it all over at him. They are currently sitting in a playoff spot. And so to me, at the end of the day, how does that not tell you everything that you need to know about what direction the team should go?
Yep. No, I honestly, I can't put it, and I can't put it any more succinctly or better than you just did. Right, wrong, indifferent, the partial, the half-hearted, the toe in the water of it always creates potential additional problems down the road. Whether or not they always go wrong, sometimes it's a wait and see. But more often than not, it's very easy to take a step back and go, well, if you hadn't, why couldn't you have? And by the way, you can go right now to the Chicago Tribune where the headline reads, why does he get to save his job? Ryan Poles is in line to hire another Chicago Bears coach, but should he be? Right. So the questions are being asked about a guy that we really liked and thought did a great job initially and getting all these picks and everything else. But your decision-making process stuck with the head coach. And now you have to turn over all of these elements. So that's a really good point by you, Andy. When we come back in on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at our next tandem of head coach and GM, how it fits, their ties or lack thereof to the Giants organization, and whether or not we would immediately say yes to it. Where would it rank in our tier of tandems as we went and took a look, obviously, at Mike Vrabel last week? So be sure to be a part of that. The Giants lost 35-14 to the Baltimore Ravens. If you're looking for something to do on a Monday night, yes, go watch the LA Raiders, or the Vegas Raiders, I should say. LA, we came close enough. Go watch the Raiders game. If they win that game by some miracle, by some chance, the Giants will officially not only have the number one overall pick, which they do right now, they'll also have a game in hand, which just means if you finish losing, then you get that number one pick and you get to control your destiny at the top of that draft class. Oh boy. What a fun time. You know, guys, I also want to take a quick little moment here just to mention that this is our 501st episode of this podcast. We celebrate our 500th on Friday. We're not about fanfare. We put in the work, but we are halfway home to 1,000. Andy, congratulations to you and I. Big arm up over. Pat yourself on the back. Get us on YouTube at One Giant Podcast. Get us on the podcast feed, as always, at Adam Armbrecht, at AMAC214, and at One Giant Podcast over on X. But until the next time, until the best times, for the 501st time, as Andrew Mackowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.